Well, hey everybody, this is Pastor Brandon with the weekly update. This past week, we talked about a very important lesson that Jesus teaches his disciples and us. It's about the concept of greatness, because we see a vast difference between worldly greatness and godly greatness. Because on the one hand, worldly greatness, we think of maybe these heroes of the faith. Maybe we think of famous politicians or famous athletes. Muhammad Ali comes to mind, the boxer who called himself the greatest. But the disciples began arguing among one another in Luke 9:46 through 48 about which of them was the greatest. And greatness in God's kingdom isn't like the greatness that we think of in the worldly sense of the word. Because greatness in God's kingdom is completely different than worldly greatness. So in the beginning of Luke 9:46, we see that an argument arose among the disciples as to which of them was the greatest. The disciples were intensely focused on their own greatness. They were just doing amazing things in Jesus' name. He had given them power and authority to heal the sick and cast out demons. They had recently failed to cast out a demon that Jesus had to cast out. Not only were they doing things in Jesus' name, but we have Peter, James, and John who come down from the Mount of Transfiguration. And it had been revealed to them, this amazing experience where Jesus' countenance changed and shone, and they saw Moses and Elijah, and they must be coming down the Mount of Transfiguration feeling pretty good about themselves. So the disciples are arguing among themselves, and you know what? What did Jesus just tell them right before this? See, just before this, in Luke chapter 9, Jesus had just told them for the second time that the Son of Man would be handed over to men. So that means the Son of Man is Jesus would be handed over to the chief priests and scribes and the Romans who would kill him. And this was concealed from the disciples. They didn't fully understand what Jesus meant. But Jesus tells them this crucial piece of information, and then the disciples right after turn and start arguing about which of them was greater. Could you believe it? And this isn't even the only time they do this, because later, after something very important, the disciples do this again. In Luke 22, we see the account of the Last Supper. Jesus tells his disciples, "This bread represents my body broken for you. This cup represents my blood poured out for you." And then Jesus tells the disciples one of them would betray him. The disciples discuss, "Which one of us would betray you, Lord?" And then you know what they discuss after that? Then an argument broke out among them as to which one of them was the greatest. Here we go again. So the disciples have this discussion not once but twice among which of them were the best. They missed the point of Jesus entirely. They were focused on themselves rather than the God they serve. Here is the tough part for us. How often are we just like them? How often do we feel the same thing I said on Sunday? If we come to church twice and someone else goes to church once. If we come to church 3 times a week and somebody goes only twice. We should not be like this. Let me encourage you, do not be like the disciples. Keep in mind this very important truth. The message of Christ is always greater than the messenger of Christ. And then in contrast to this worldly sense of greatness, we see godly greatness, which is the inverse, the opposite of worldly greatness. Instead of thinking of one's self, you think of others and you put them first. There's no room for comparison here. And so Jesus in Luke 9:47 and 48 takes a young child and brings him to use as an example for the disciples. Because Jesus, he didn't just hear what the disciples were arguing about. He was out of earshot. He could discern what they were thinking in their hearts. Remember, Jesus is God. He has omniscience. He can know all things. And Jesus knew what was in their hearts. So he brings this child to use as an example. Children were thought of as a nuisance. Children had no rights. They were a burden to their parents in the first century. And rabbis wouldn't even teach children until they were a certain age, because what was the point? So they didn't value children very highly. They were thought of on the lowest end of the social ladder. And yet, Jesus takes a child, right? Telling the disciples kind of like, this is childish. So I'll show you. I'll use this example for you. So Jesus takes the child and says, whoever receives this child, meaning the least of these, the lowest of the social ladder, in my name receives me. Then Jesus says, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. That's a capital H in him. That is God the Father. Whoever receives the least of these receives Jesus, and whoever receives Jesus receives God the Father who sent. And then, for those who are least will be called great. Notice something important here with those words. The disciples were arguing about who was going to be the greatest. They were comparing themselves. But Jesus talks about who would be great. There's no comparison. There's no comparison needed in the kingdom of heaven. Because at the end of the day, do we get to heaven because of anything we've done? Absolutely not. We go to heaven because of what God has done, because of what Christ has done, dying for us on the cross. That is the only way we can possibly get to heaven. So what do we have to boast in other than Jesus Christ? Because there's nothing we did to earn our salvation. It is only by grace, the grace of God, through faith, that we may be saved. Our application is that we must not be self-seeking. We must be self-sacrificial. We must not look for our own interest. We must look for God's interest and do His will with our time on earth. We have no reason to boast. We have no reason to compare ourselves to one another, because only God is worthy of greatness, and we can only go to heaven because He is great. The kingdom of heaven, true godly greatness, is found in humility, not haughtiness. I challenge you and myself with that message today. We have a wonderful, wonderful schedule coming up. This Sunday, first and foremost, is Sanctity of Life Sunday. We are preaching on the importance of life, especially when it comes to the preborn. So I pray that you would tune in for that message. We have our prayer service on Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Our children's activities Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Sunday school Sundays at 9:45 a.m. Go to Sunday school, church. You need to be there to dive deeper into the Word. 11 a.m. is our worship service. I pray that you're there. And then 6 p.m. is the evening worship service. We are going through Genesis at that service. Go to our website, FSBCKW.org, to see all of our events. I pray that the Lord would bless you and keep you and make His face shine upon you. Serve the Lord, who is great, this week. Have a great week, church.